Okay, welcome back everyone. So a lot of you guys asked me to make a video on how I edit. So today I chose 4 photos here that I'm going to edit for you, so you guys can see how I edit my own photos. And before we get started, I just want to say that I also have some presets on my website, which I will leave a link in the description below where you can get them. And if you want to support me, my work, you can get those presets. And I also put some actions in there for like creating gradient filters. So you'll own those as well. But anyway, so I picked these 4 photos here for a specific reason. This was on a early morning light. It was a bit cloudy, so we have this very nice soft light. This is of my wife. This is, behind my house. I was going for a walk. There was this incredible sunset, so I wanted to capture it. And I also put a photo here with some greens in there because I know a lot of people have a hard time editing green colors. So yeah, let's start with this one. So first things first, this is what I always do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my horizon is straight. So I'm going to straighten it. Maybe one more. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I always do is I always go down to the tone curve here, okay? But what I'm going to do here a little bit is I'm going to open the exposure just a tiny bit, because if we see up on the histogram, we can see it's underexposed. Now, usually I shoot underexposed quite a lot because I feel like I can control my colors better when I'm underexposing. Whereas when you overexpose, you lose a lot of details in the highlights. So I always underexpose a little bit, sometimes even a stop, just to preserve the highlights. Which, if you look here, the flamingos, if I took the exposure up, I would probably blow the highlights on their feathers. So just taking the exposure up just a tiny bit. And usually here, like the highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, I usually don't really touch them that much. So I might use it a little bit just to give it some contrast. Okay, so like if I take the blacks layer, like a lot of people like crush the blacks like this because it creates contrast, but I don't like doing that because these panels here are so generic, like it controls everything in the whole image, right? So I don't want to do that. I want to control everything myself. So I don't want to just take the black slider and slide it down to get like, dark contrast. And same thing with the contrast slider. Like I usually don't do this. Like I don't boost the contrast all the way up. It's, you can do that. It gives you like very strong colors because when you're increasing the contrast, it also boosts the saturation of the colors. And I prefer to, control those things myself. So if I do this, it looks better, let's say, to someone's eye than this because this is flat. But we can do this in a better way, which is what I'm going to show you now. So I always work in the tone curve. This is the latest Lightroom that I have here. And if you see, we have a tone curve, and then we have this region here, which you can control highlights, lights, darks, and shadows, which is basically kind of like this one here, but you just have more control. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go here, and we're going to draw a shape on the tone curve. Now, on the tone curve, you can see all the information on the histogram here. It's also down here, okay? So this is telling you like where the information is in the range, okay? In the range of the luminance. So here, a lot of people, just do a simple S-curve like this, and it creates a lot of contrast. So if I toggle this off, you can see how it was before, and I toggle it on, and you can see there's a lot of contrast, okay? Now, me, I don't usually do that. Sometimes I might do it, but generally not really. So what I'm going to do for this specific image is I'm going to bring down the darks just a little bit, okay? And here where we have a nice peak, I'm going to increase it just a tiny bit. And then what I really like in my own photos is I like having good midtones. So like this is the middle. So I'm going to boost the midtones a bit. And then something which, I guess not a lot of people do it. It's just kind of my style. What I like to do is I bring the highlights down. So I start bringing the highlights down and I start crushing the highlights here. So look at this. If I bring this all the way down, you see all the bright areas kind of you start crushing the highlights. You can see this. So look at the white on the flamingos. If I bring it up, I'm overexposing the highlights, right? But if I bring it down, I'm also crushing them. So usually it's a fine balance for me. So something like this looks good, maybe just a little bit higher, something like this. Okay, so if I look here now, this to me looks a little bit overexposed. So that's probably in the mid-tones and the highlights. So just bring that down a little bit, like this. Now what you can also do is the black level here. If you want to give a fade to your photos, you can just increase the black point. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the black and I'm turning it into middle gray, kind of. You know, I'm graying it out. So usually I like to lift it a little bit, like 9 or 8, just to give it a bit of fade, like a film fade. And also it's the same thing with the whites here. So basically I'm killing 100% white. When this point is up here, you have 100% white, okay? I'm killing the white. And the reason I do this is because I'm really inspired by like matte paper, like how photos look on matte paper. So by doing this, I'm kind of emulating what a matte paper would look like. So that's why I do that. Now we can also go in here, you know, and change the colors of the that we have by playing with the color tone curves. But I'm not going to do that here. What I'm going to do now is go down to the HSL, okay? And most of my work happens into the HSL tab, okay? So generally speaking, I really like 2 colors a lot. And if you look at all my photos, this is what you will see. You will see a lot of blue and a lot of red, okay, or orange. So I always toggle these sliders to give me that look. So for example, I usually always take the oranges and push them a little bit towards the red. Okay, now if you pay attention to the legs of the flamingo, now they're kind of like yellowish orange, and now they're like red. Okay, but I also have to be careful because look at the background. Like I'm shifting the background way too much. Like the background is green now and the background is red now, which looks completely unnatural. Okay, so whatever I do is I make small edits. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this maybe to like -10, -12, somewhere there. And the yellows, which control, if I zoom out, the yellows, what do they control? They control the background, okay? So we can see the yellows lie a little bit in the green and a little bit in the yellows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the yellows a little bit to the orange, okay, which is going to give me that nice brown, golden kind of deep color, which I really like. And then the greens, I'm going to check this. So this is what I always do. I always go crazy, like left, right, so I can actually see what's happening, okay? So if we pay attention to this area right here, this area, okay? Look at that area. If I take the green slider and I push it, you can see what's happening, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this all the way to the left because this way it's blending in with the brown and it looks better. If I had a strong green like that, that just looks really bad. It looks hideous. It just stands out way too much, okay? And it looks really bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to the left and blend it in with the browns that we have from the yellows. And then finally, we're going to look at the blue color, okay? So we have the sky and the lake here. So what I usually do is I take my blue slider and I just faintly like take it to the left towards cyan. And I feel like that makes a huge difference in the color of the water that I like. And then with the aquas, I have to see where they lie. So this lies in the background. So if you look at this area right here, it lies in there mostly, but also in the sky, okay? So in this case, I don't really have to touch this. What I can do though is bring it a little bit to the right to blend in with my blues a little bit better. So, are there any purples in here? Oh, there is some purple, but I actually like where it is, but I might push it a bit to the right here. And magenta is probably the legs of the flamingos, so it's not really doing much, so I'm going to leave that alone. Now, let's check saturation and luminance. So the hue is basically we're changing each individual color, right? So we're taking, let's say, the yellows and turning it more red instead of yellow. The saturation boosts the intensity of the color. So if I take my yellows and I boost it, you can see the background. It's really brown now. And now it's like there's no color. So you see that in the background? So for me, this looks fine. I might just decrease the yellow a little bit, but it looks good. It looks really good already, so I don't really want to touch it that much. And the greens, let me see what happens. So the greens, if I take it to the left all the way, it kind of kills the greens. I don't like that. So I'm just going to bring it a little bit down so it blends better with the brown. So that's fine for me. Saturation of the blue is a little bit too strong for my taste. So I'm going to bring this just slightly, and the aquas as well, just slightly down, somewhere there. There is nothing else that I want to do saturation was here. So I'm going to go to the luminance. And here, the luminance basically controls the luminosity, so how bright a color is or how dark a color is. And if you push them too much, you will see that the photo starts breaking down. So you have to be very careful with the luminance. Of course, if you have a full frame camera, you have a little bit more leeway than a APS-C camera. So this was shot on a Sony a7 III. We have a full frame camera. So with the yellows, I'm just trying to check to see, like, do I want to bring the light of the background a bit darker, or do I want to like increase it? Okay, so in this case, I actually want to bring it down so the focus goes more on the flamingos. So that's what I'm going to do. And same with the oranges. If we look at the oranges, where they lie, they also lie in the flamingos, so I have to be a bit careful. So I'm just going to decrease it just a little bit, somewhere there. And now the other thing I'm going to do is the blues. So the blues are too bright, so we don't really have a lot of contrast right now. So if I take the blues and I bring them down a bit, we create some more contrast. Let me do that, somewhere there. So I can pull the blues really down. You see what happens? I mean, some people do this, but I don't really like it because it just crushes everything too much. And then you can do the opposite. So if I take it all the way to the right, it just becomes very, very bright, which also looks completely unnatural and doesn't look good. So I'm just going to bring it down just a little bit. Okay, somewhere there. Now, I want to come back to the top, and I'm going to fix a few things that I didn't before. Because first I wanted to get a general feel for the photo, and then I want to fix slowly all the other properties. So I usually check also the tint. So if something is a bit too purple or too green, in this case, I feel like the tint is good. I mean, I could put it down just a little bit, but actually that's making it a bit too green, so I think the tint is fine. Same with the temperature, so I can make it more green or more blue. In this case, I shot this in daylight balance, so it looks balanced, but maybe I can shift it a bit more to the blue, somewhere there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check we can play a bit with the contrast here. So I want to give it some contrast, but not too much, maybe somewhere there. That looks good to me. And also, these here, the presence, the texture, clarity, dehaze, I usually don't touch the texture and clarity. If I touch the clarity, I might like give it like 5 points. But to be honest, I actually like decreasing clarity so I can make the image generally be smoother. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as it is. And dehaze, basically, I use this a lot. Sometimes I crank it up to like 15 or 20, and it gives a lot of detail and also creates contrast. So if I decrease it, obviously I lose contrast. But in this case, let's see. If I do a +10, that looks pretty good to me. Yep, before and after. I like that, +10. Also vibrance, I usually like just give it a plus. I don't really touch the saturation. What I'm seeing now is that I don't like the color of the blue because the dehaze that we used kind of changed the color of the blue because it made it darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the hue, and the blues here, I'm going to take it a little bit more to cyan, somewhere there, -15, and then bring this up a little more. Perfect. So this photo already looks good to me, but what I'm going to do is, we can play with the color grade here too, but I don't think this photo needs any color grading. I'm going to sharpen it. So usually sharpening, I put it around 60 or 70. And what you can do, you see this masking here? If you press, if you're on a Mac, if you press Option, and I guess if you're on Windows, if you press Alt and click it, you can see where the sharpness affects everything. So a lot of the times I'll just leave it and sharpen everything, but sometimes, like in this case, I don't want to sharpen the water here or the sky. So I will mask it out by holding the Option key, and I will take the sharpening down so it only affects the flamingos and maybe a little bit of the background, somewhere there. Okay? Actually, that looks a little bit too sharp for me, so I'm going to bring it down to about 50. That looks good. Okay. Noise reduction, I don't need to do any noise reduction. This is, I think, ISO 100, so I don't need anything. So the next thing I'm going to do, the final thing I guess here, is the calibration. So this is a very powerful tool. So you have, again, three channels of colors here. But what happens here, instead of the HSL, is when you push a color to the left or the right, all the colors in the image will shift. So when you're controlling, let's say, the reds, you're not just controlling the reds, you're actually controlling every single color. You're pushing them more one side or the other. So in this case, I don't need to do much. What I like to do with the blue is I always bring it down a little bit to the cyan, so like -10. But because when I bring it to the cyan, everything, the reds and oranges also become a bit too red. So I also shift the reds towards the orange a little bit. So this looks good to me. I'm looking at the blue again, and the blue is throwing my eye off a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the hue and just make it a little bit more blue instead of cyan, somewhere there. That looks really good to me. So the other thing I can do here is, what I can do is get a graduate filter and just bring it from the bottom here, like this, a big graduate filter. And what I'm going to do is bring down the exposure at the bottom. So basically, I'm making the viewer's eyes go straight to the flamingos instead of looking at the bright blue color here. And I can also do the same from the top. I don't think I'm going to do it, but let's just see what it looks like. Yeah, I don't like that. So I'm not going to do that. It doesn't need it. So this looks good to me. And if I wanted to do one thing, is I would check back the white balance again. So let's check the white balance, maybe make it a bit more yellow. Let's see, before is blue, now yellow. I actually like it a bit more yellow, so I'm going to bring it up just a little bit, as it was basically. So this photo is finished, and let's see the before and after. So this is the before, and this is the after. So pretty big difference. I like the tones. The blues are very, the cyans and the blues are actually like blending really nicely, and the green and the browns, the yellows are blending very nicely. I really like that. So this looks good. Maybe the highlight, I would bring it down actually, because the flamingos are they're crushing a little bit, somewhere there. This looks good to me. Okay, so let's go to the next photo. Now, this is a photo of my wife. We shot this at sundown. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this photo because it's probably going to go on Instagram. So I'll do it 4:5, somewhere there. And what I'm seeing straight off the bat is that it's a little bit too yellow. So I'm going to bring down the white balance somewhere here, 52 or 5300 looks good. And then I'm going to go straight to the tone curve. So again, we can see all the information here in the tone curve. You can see these here, right here. So what we're going to do is create some contrast. So I'm going to bring down the blacks just a little bit, put a point here, bring it up a little bit. This has come a bit too high, somewhere here. And I'm going to crush the highlights again. Okay, so So in this case, you can clearly see the highlights. Like look here in the water, the white in the water and the white on her dress. So if I crush the highlights, you can see what's happening there. So I crush them usually just a little bit like this. Creates a fade in the whites, and I actually like that look. So this is why I do it. And also I can create a fade in the blacks, especially in her hair because it's too black. So that looks good to me. Then again, straight we go to HSL. So here we have to be careful because as you can see, the color of her skin matches the color of the rock. So whatever we do to the skin is also going to affect the rock. So we have to be a little bit careful and get something that where the skin tone looks good, but also the rock doesn't look something crazy, which, you know, doesn't exist. So let's take the oranges down a little bit to the red. A huge difference already on her face. So you can see it's a bit greenish yellow here, and if I take it 2 stops down, we have a nice orangish glow. Also, we can bring the reds towards the oranges a little bit to blend the skin better. You can see if I leave the reds as it was, her lips and a little bit here on the rock is a bit too red, and if I bring it over, it blends better. Same thing with the yellows. So the yellows, if I do this, it becomes green. We don't want that. Our 2 primary colors here are orange and blue. So I want to intensify that. So I'm going to take the yellows and drag them to the reds, to the oranges. And I'm going to find a color that I like. So I actually like it all the way here. It looks a little bit extreme, but it looks good. The hue of the water. So I actually like the color of the water. I'll bring the blues a little bit towards cyan, just a little bit. And then the aquas, basically controlling the water in the back. So I find that it's a little bit too aqua-y, so if that's even a word. So I'm going to take this towards the blue to bring it more closer to the color of the blue in the front. So that looks really good. And I don't have to touch purple or magenta. I don't see any in here. So I'm not going to touch those. Saturation. I'm going to bring the blues down just a little bit because it's a bit too vibrant for my taste. Somewhere there. The yellows, let's see. So we can do a lot of things here. Obviously the yellows do look nice in the back on the rock, but I actually like it if I bring it down a little bit because then there's more color on her face than the rock in the back and she stands out more. So this is why I'm going to bring the yellows down. And maybe her skin tone is a bit too saturated. So let's see. Yeah, I'm going to bring this a little bit lower as well. Greens, there's no greens here, so I'm not going to touch that. Luminance. Same thing again. Let's see what happens to the blues. So we can darken the water, but I actually don't like that. So I'm just going to leave it as it is actually. There's no need to touch the luminosity of the blues. So the oranges and the yellows are going to affect her skin and the rock. So I can brighten her skin or I can darken it. In this case, I'm actually going to darken it just a little bit. And the yellows as well. You can see the yellows are also in her dress and also at the rock in the back. So I'm also going to bring those down just a little bit. So basically what I'm doing is when I'm bringing the luminance down, I'm also recovering details in the rock here and also in her dress. So this is why I'm bringing those down. What we can do here now, I'm actually going to split tone here. For those of you who don't know what split tone is basically we're going to give a specific color to the shadows and a specific color to the highlights. So what I would like to do here is I'm going to get a hue of like 200, 190 or 200, somewhere there. And basically I'm putting blues in the highlights. Can you see that? Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of blue in the highlights, somewhere around there. And to the shadows, we're going to bring in some reddish orange. So let's do that. About somewhere 12, 13, somewhere there. Okay, so if I turn off color grading now so you can see the difference. This is before and this is after. Let's do it one more time. This is before and this is after. So basically by putting a little bit of blue in the highlights and a little bit of red in the shadows, I kind of blended the photo a little bit better. So the colors of blue and red are more even, let's say, throughout the whole photo, which is the only reason why I did this. So this is before. It looks good, don't get me wrong, but when you combine, when you put a little bit of red in the shadows and a little bit of blues in the highlights, it just brings the photo more together and looks better. Sharpening, again, we can do a bit of sharpening somewhere there. I'm going to mask this because I don't want to sharpen everything. Somewhere there, like, looks good. And we don't have noise, so no noise reduction. And we can do the same thing as before here, so bring the blues a little bit to the left and the oranges to the right. This is just a personal preference thing, you don't have to do it, but I just like what it does. It just intensifies the colors a little bit more, so if you can see the before and after. So this is why I use it. Also, if the saturation of the orange is a bit too much, I can just decrease it from here as well. But I actually like, I might bring it down just a little bit. Just -5, because there's a nice glow on her face. Also, I'm going to center this a little bit more, so it looks better, somewhere there. And yeah, this looks good. So what else can we do to this photo? And guys, look, I didn't even touch this area at all. We can, of course, we can just increase the brights a little bit and the shadows a little bit. No clarity, no dehaze, no need for dehaze here. There's already a lot of contrast. No need to touch these. Already a lot of color. So what I'm going to do is, we can see here that the sun is coming from the right, right? If you look at her face, there's a shadow here, so it's coming from the right. So what I'm going to do that is I'm going to intensify the light, the direction of the light in this photo. So first thing I'm going to do, take a graduated filter. I'm going to pull this like this, basically from the direction of the sun. And we're going to increase the exposure just a little bit to show that the sun is coming from that side. And the other thing I can do is create another graduated filter at the bottom here. And we can darken this area just a little bit to create some contrast. Looks good enough. And I'm going to also do one more graduate filter right above here, because I feel like the rock is a little bit too bright and is taking away from her face. So I'm going to bring another one here, a small one, and bring the exposure down. Now, I want to show you guys a trick here, because as you can see, when I'm bringing the exposure down, it's also making the blacks of the rock a little bit too black, and I don't like that. So basically, I just want to control the bright parts. So what we can do is we can come down here. You see this here, range mask. A lot of people don't know about this, but basically it's a tool where you tell Lightroom where to affect, like your settings that you change, where to affect in the photo. So there's two options, color and luminance. If you take color, you can take this picker and pick a color, and basically it will affect whatever that color is. Okay, it will only affect that color. So in this case it works here, but it's still getting the shadow, so I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use the luminance. And what this does, if we click here, show luminance mask, we can see basically anything that's red is being affected right now by our exposure, that we decrease the exposure. So here you have a range, and the left side controls the blacks and the right side controls the highlights. Okay, so what I want to do basically is I want to tell Lightroom to not underexpose the darker areas. I only want to underexpose the bright areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the range of the low, the blacks basically, the shadows, and bring it up so it doesn't affect that area. Okay, because I don't want to crush those more. So somewhere there. And now the exposure that we did here is only affecting the bright parts. So that looks good. One last thing I can do is I can make a radial filter on her. Here. We're going to invert this because I want the radial filter to work on the inside, not the outside. So invert. And I'm going to feather it a lot. and we're gonna first of all bring the highlights down just a little bit, and then bring the exposure up, highlights a bit more, and bring also the shadows up, because I can see a lot of shadow. Her hair is basically too black, so I'm going to bring the shadow up to recover somewhere there. Perfect. So I can see if I turn this off, that's before and that's after. So I'm just brightening her face basically to stand out a little bit more from the background. And same with the graduated filters. If I turn these off, look at it before. Right now it just looks like this area is too bright and this area is too dark, whereas the sun is coming from this side. It's coming from the right to the left. So basically I reversed the brightness level of here and here. So if I click it again, you can see that looks much better to me. So that's the edit on this one. Let's go to the next. And before I edit the next one, guys, I just want to remind you, there's a preset pack in the description below that how I edit my photos, so you can go and get that. So I'm gonna move through these a little bit faster because it's already been, I think, about half an hour. So first thing I see here is a dust spot right there. So I'm gonna take this brush and I'm gonna click there and remove the dust spot. So I underexposed this photo a lot, but you can see that we're still losing detail here, which is why I chose this photo, because I wanted to show you what happens when you lose detail. So if I bring the highlights back all the way down, you see this white area here? There is no detail there. So if we crush the highlights, like a lot of people do this, like they'll bring the highlights all the way down and then bring the shadows all the way up and like put contrast. But I don't really like what this looks like, so let's go and edit the way I would edit this. First things first, white balance looks pretty good to me. We might come back to this later. Let's go straight to the tone curve. I can see there's a big shadow right here. So let's expose it and see if we can recover anything. Okay, so I can see here in the shadows that I have a lot of detail, so I can recover those if I want to. So let's reset this, maybe bring it up just a tiny bit. So let's make a point here, and I'm going to make a point here on the blacks, bring it up here as well. And same thing as always, I crush the highlights, which you don't have to do, but I like it because so if I bring the highlights down, you can see how the bright part is getting darker. So I have to be careful not to crush it too much to look fake. Somewhere around there, and maybe I'll move this point a little bit higher to brighten their area. Perfect. So this looks good. I'm also going to put a fade here because we have a lot of strong blacks, and this combats that. Let's go down to the HSL. Same thing again, just like the previous ones, guys. So oranges, okay. Many things we can do here. We can actually leave it yellow like this, golden yellow. It actually looks good, but it doesn't match my other photos, which is why I move things. So I'm going to bring the oranges again a little bit to the left and the yellows to the left. So in this case, I don't want to make it too orange. So maybe like -20, that looks good. Let's see where the reds lie. There's no reds, so that's fine. Hue again, the hue actually looks good here. I'll just bring this a little bit here. And the aquas, let's see. Yeah, so right now it's a bit too aqua, so I'm going to bring it all the way to the left to +80. That looks good to me. And what I'm going to do now is, before I go to the saturation, I want to fix this area right here first, because I don't like what this looks like. So I'm going to make a radial filter. Okay, I'm going to put it here. Invert it so it only affects the inside. And what I can do is use this hue tool here. So basically this, when you change it, it will give it a color. Okay, so I'm going to make this a little bit more reddish orange, just a little bit. And let's see if we bring the exposure up. Bring the exposure. Actually, let's leave the exposure. Let's leave it like this. So I'm going to just put a little bit of orange in there. And what I'm going to do now is come here, because I want to show you these tools as well. In the tone curve, I'm going to play with these here. So what I'm going to do is increase the darks a little bit, bring the lights down so to combat that bright area. Not too much, just somewhere there. That looks good. And also the shadows. So we can see the shadows are here. I'm going to bring the shadows up just a little bit. Minus 13, that looks good. And what I'm going to do now is I'm probably going to dehaze this so I can get some more detail. Let's see. Right, I like that. Okay, let's dehaze. That looks good. And increase the shadows here a little bit, not too much. And let's see the highlights, bring them just a little bit lower. That looks good. Now what I don't like is that the sky is a bit too blue. So let's go to the saturation. And I'm going to bring the blue down somewhere like minus 40. Maybe even a little more, to give that grayish kind of blue color. That's better. Another thing I'm going to do now is create a new radial filter like this here, rotate it a bit, because I want this beam of light to continue here. So let's invert and increase the exposure like that. And let's feather it a bit more so it doesn't look too crazy, like it's overdone. And let me see there. If we do this, yeah, something like this. That looks good. So if I turn off the radial filters, just so you can see what it looks like before, that's without the radial filters, and this is with the radial filters. Now what I'm going to do is, if we increase the exposure a little more, I actually don't like it when I increase the exposure because I like the dark theme. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a gradient filter from the bottom, because there's nothing down here that's really interesting. So I'm going to bring the exposure down there even more. And I also might do another radial filter here on the houses, invert it, and increase the exposure. Actually, let's not increase the exposure. Let's open the shadows like that. And let me see if I take it more golden. I'm also going to change the temperature, make it a little bit more golden. That looks really good. And let's see. So what I'm going to do in this case is here, because it looks too white and I don't like that, is I'm going to go to the color grading, go to the highlights, and put some red into the highlights. Something like this. I don't want to overdo it, but to blend it a little bit better. So plus 15. So look at the before and then the after. So I'm putting some more golden color in there, which looks really good. Also, another thing we didn't check is the saturation of the yellow and the green. So the yellow looks good to me. I'm going to leave it as it is. The green might kill it just a little bit. So this looks good. Let's just see. Let's crop it a little bit to make it look a bit better. Maybe somewhere here. That looks good. And also, I'm finding these white dots here a bit distracting. So I might just remove those with the brush tool. That looks better. Let's remove that one too. And also, I don't like this white part here. Let's remove that. Basically, I'm removing everything that's a distraction. This looks good. I might just put a little bit of clarity. Makes a big difference here. And yeah, this is done. Just increasing the shadows just a little bit. So if I look the before, this is the before, and this is the after. Might bring the exposure down a little bit actually. like this. Yes. Okay, let's move to the final photo. This one, first things first, let's crop it. And I guess this is also going to go on Instagram, so let's do 4:5 and center my hand there and bring it down somewhere there. Okay. So, I see a lot of green here. I find that the tint is a bit too magenta. I can see it in my skin and I don't like that. So I'm going to bring the magenta a little bit towards the green. Somewhere there, that looks good. Let's go down to the tone curve. So same thing here, bring down the blacks and then the darks here, just bring it up, bring up the midtones and fade the whites. Something like that. I don't want to fade it too much. Let me just see, somewhere there. That looks good. Let's see if you create more contrast. Okay, I like that. Might take the blacks down a little more. Let's see. Actually, no, I'm crushing it way too much, so leave it there. Let's create a fade again. That looks pretty good. So, colors. First thing I see, which I hate, is the color of the green. So the green is probably lying in my yellows and my greens, so let's check. Yes, the yellows do affect it, and also the green. Perfect. So first things first, this is way too like slimy green for me, and I hate that. So let's bring the oranges a bit, the yellows a bit to the orange, and the greens more to the yellow. Not too much, somewhere there, -25. And already I can see that I hate the saturation, so I'm gonna kill the saturation on the greens. But obviously don't kill it all the way like this. This just looks fake and weird. So I'm just gonna decrease the saturation somewhere where it looks balanced. I like that. Another thing I'm noticing is that there's light coming in. You can see it on my hand here. So I think if I warm this photo up, it will look way better than what it does now. So let's warm the temperature. There we go. There's the color. Not too much, that's a bit too much. So somewhere about 6K. That looks good. And let's check the tint again, because now my skin looks a bit too green. Yeah, so +7 on the tint. Let's bring the exposure up. Let's bring the highlights down just a little bit. And increase the shadows to get more detail. I might dehaze this. Yeah, I do like the dehaze here because it's bringing a lot of contrast into my hand, because right now my hand looks a bit flat. So if I bring some dehaze, it brings some contrast in there. I'm gonna increase the exposure a little more. And now let's also control this region here. So let's bring the darks up. Let's kill the highlights. Actually, you know what? In this case, I'm actually going to kill the highlights a lot. So I'm going to bring the highlights to like -50 and the lights to create a more flat look. I think it will look good on this photo. So let's go back to the hue. I find my hand is a bit too flat. So let's fix that. And I can also see a bit of green here in my fingers. So we're going to fix that first. Let me see, let's bring the saturation down. Let's change the hue of the yellows a bit more towards orange to match my skin better. Let's check our greens. Okay, actually in this case, I'm going to leave the greens as they were, and I'm going to decrease the saturation a little more. That looks good. So let's go to color grade. I'm going to put some reds in the shadows. And remember, the reason I'm doing this is to blend the colors a bit better together. So I'm going to put some reds, which is giving color to my arm as well, to my hand. And I might put some blue in the highlights. Let's see what it looks like. I like it. It looks very vintage. So let's do that around +20. We can sharpen, again, 50 or 60, somewhere there. Let's mask this one as well. Somewhere there, that looks good. And this is what I want to do. Let's see. -10 on the blues. Let's see where the oranges go. Actually, I'm going to leave the reds probably as they are. Like this. What I don't like now is my skin is a bit too bland. So let's bring the luminance down a little bit. Let me see. That looks good. I'm going to flatten this out. And the yellows, the luminance of the yellows. So we can go for something dark like this, or we can actually brighten them. I think that's popping the white parts way too much, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring them down, flatten it. And same thing with the greens. Let's see where those lie. I actually like the greens to have a bit of brightness, so let's put it there. What this needs is a good boost in exposure right now. So let's expose it correctly, somewhere there. Let me just check the tint one more time. Yeah, tint's good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a graduate filter somewhere here and bring the exposure down somewhere like this by creating contrast. The other thing I'm going to do is bring one like this from the left side. Let's bring the exposure a little bit lower. And finally, I like that the light is coming from the top right corner. So I'm going to create a radial filter somewhere there. Invert it and increase the exposure there. Like this. That looks pretty good. Something like this. And might bring the exposure down like this. That looks good. Now we have good contrast. Let's actually increase the contrast just a little bit. +15. I'm crushing the blacks though, so I have to be careful. And let's create another radial filter in the middle. Invert it and feather it. And I'm going to increase the exposure there. Like this. That looks good to me. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play a bit with the colors a little bit more. So let's check their greens again. The greens are very tricky. So in this case, let's see. I'm actually going to push the greens a little bit more to the right, make them more deeper green, and then bring the saturation down just a bit more. And also, I think I'm going to bring the luminance down. So I think it's too strong. Somewhere there. Check where the yellows are. The yellows. It's good there. And let's check our oranges. Make sure my hand actually looks natural. It looks good. Might kill the luminance a little more. Somewhere there. So what I can do on this one is we can add some grain to make it look a bit vintagey. So let's add some grain, around 50. And the size, make it about 30. Somewhere there. So one more thing I can do here to make this even have stronger contrast. I'm going to bring one more graduate filter, a big one from the top. Increase the exposure. Like this. Let's see if we do it more yellow. And a bit more magenta there, so it's more orange. Like that. And then bring one more from the bottom here. And I'm going to darken that a little more to create more contrast. So it's like my arm is coming through a darker area. And one final touch, I'm going to look at the white balance again. So let's play with this till we're happy. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. And let's check the tint one last time. +2. That looks good to me. The other thing we could do, like this already looks really good to me, but if I want to do something to get a different look, I would just play with the greens, because it depends if you like this green color or not. So what I could do is bring the greens more to the left and make it more orange. And now that I'm seeing it, I actually like that more. So I'm going to bring them more to the left and maybe bring the yellows a bit more to the right, so there's a balance somewhere there. Perfect. I really like this photo. So let's look at the before and after. This is the before and this is the after. Let's look at all the photos. So this is the landscape. This is the photo of my wife. And these are the flamingos. So if I go to the library, to the thumbnail view here, if we look at them all together, you can see that the photos actually match. I would probably have to work this one a little bit more to match the rest, but the style is very consistent. So this one looks a little bit too red in the shadows right now when I'm looking at next to the others. So we'll probably have to go and fix that. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this video and if you found it helpful, leave a like below. Once again, I have some presets in the description. You can go and check those out. Subscribe to the channel, and if you have any questions, leave them down below and I will get back to you. And if you have any ideas of what you want me to work on, also please leave that down in the comments. So thank you guys, and see you in the next video.